Hello, everybody. Welcome to This Week in Innovation. On today's show, I catch up with my old friend Paula Rosenblum, managing partner at RSR Research, for a wide-ranging conversation about life as an analyst, how vendors and founders can better engage with the analyst community, and some of the classic mistakes to avoid. Paul, I think, is probably one of the best analysts out there and has an awful lot of experience and is very happy to share some of those insights with all of us. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Paula, can you give us a little overview of what you do as an analyst and what your firm does?
What we try to do is we focus a lot on marketing intelligence rather than on competitive intelligence. So we never compare one vendor with another. We just don't do it. It's not part of our model. What we do is talk about the business issues that drive technology investment. On the vendor side, how we make money is we take a lot of retail domain expertise coupled with a boatload of studies that we run every year to make sure we stay current. And we cut that data lots of different ways, and we advise vendors on the best way to message to different kinds of retailers, both across sectors and even, interestingly enough, across their performance level. Because those that we long ago called retail winners, the conversation can be different, and there are watch outs. So we try to talk about that, and then based on this data that we've gathered and our knowledge, we also help retailers with road mapping. But in all honesty, most of our money is made through tech vendors and those kinds of advice.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And my role is I'm one of the founding partners, and I'm continue to be an analyst as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much the vendor community really drives all of us in retail. Gartner's side, probably shouldn't say, but a big chunk of it is vendor revenue, and other firms it's similar. So I'm not sure retailers really pay for a whole lot of research in this industry. They provide it, insights, but they sure don't pay for a whole lot of it. So when you're talking to a vendor, what are you looking for? How should a vendor start to engage with you?
We actually put out a vendor newsletter some years ago, and they're up on our website now, of the best briefing ever. So the best way to engage with us is to tell us the problem you're trying to solve, the market you're going after, if you've got any lighthouse customers or if you've got a full set of customers, and how they're doing. That's the key for us, is all about the business issues. So that's the best way to contact for a business development person who will schedule probably all three of us. And my partners are Steve Rowan and Brian Kilcourse. And we'll try and listen, and we'll be as honest as we can be in terms of what message it is you're delivering.
How long do those briefings typically last? Do you have a set time frame? Like, I know in Gartner speak, it used to be a half hour to 45 minutes max. Do you have a time limit?
No, we let it go. An hour is a pretty standard. We can't even say hello in a half hour. So an hour is about right for us.
Yeah. So what's the smallest firm that can get in front of you? Do you have a limit? Do they have to be a potential client? How low do you go?
Oh no, we'll go. I'll talk to just about anybody, because you don't just want to stay in what's hot. You want to see what's coming. So we'll talk to anybody. You'll remember I started getting into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency ages ago.
Why didn't you tell me to do that?
No, but I was. I mean, when every year they write to me and say, want to come to the conference? I say, yeah, remember I went to the first one when it was just in a sweaty little room on the second floor. And now they've gone past filling up the Knight Center to having 15,000 people lining up all outside of Wynwood Convention Center in Miami. So I've been around. So you could be really small. You could be a startup. Sometimes I'll just have an informal conversation with people if they're even not ready to even pitch the whole group of us. I'm happy. I try to be really approachable. I'm just a human. I don't really ascribe to the analyst as God model. I really am just a human, and I'm happy to talk to anybody and hear what they got to say.
So I got to go look at that document. What's the perfect briefing? So what is the perfect briefing? And Paula, does it change if it's a vendor versus a small founder versus, let's say, Oracle or SAP?
It doesn't change from our perspective. What does change is that the smallest vendors tend to be really enamored with their technology. And so they forget that they're supposed to start with what problem are you solving? Why do you exist? Why did you decide that you should exist? And the larger vendors by now understand that. They know that a commercial doesn't really help. But you may think your technology is the best in the world and the coolest thing, and that's great. But what we really want to know is what problem are you solving, and then tell us how, even if you're tiny. And then, of course, what do you want to be when you grow up? What's your goal in life? Do you want to become the next SAP? Do you want to be subsumed by Oracle? What's your goal in life?
What are the mistakes that you see most often during a briefing?
Honestly, it's people that are just full of themselves. Worst briefing ever, and this one, I'll never forget it. Steve and I were on some call, and I can't. And for those of you who know me, I'm not 10 years old. I've been around a while, and Steve somehow has become 45, which I don't understand, but he's older now. So we're on the phone, and this must be about 5 years ago, and this founder of some company, I don't even remember what he was selling anymore. He starts talking and he said, the thing about older people is they really need to hear the key click on their phones because they're just too old to understand how to just type. And I'm definitely over 40. And I really did a spit take. It was like the only ever time that we just both started laughing. Because we're just like, do you understand at all who you're talking to? And so that's the biggest mistake I've seen, is where you're so enamored with yourself and your technology that you forget who you're talking to and you forget what the problem is.
Yeah, gosh, that's so true. I always say the biggest mistake I see founders make, I didn't see it as much towards my end of my career as I did at the beginning, but you're either too aggressive or too not. So in the early part of my career, boy, it was just, I can think of probably 15 or 20 briefings where it was just, I want to show how stupid the Gartner analyst is. And in my case, it's easy to do. You want to come at me, fine. We can fight if you want, knock yourself out. I get paid whether you enjoy yourself or you don't. And so I never saw the value in that. And then the other is where every question I ask is, wow, that's such a great question. If I'm asking you, so how do you spell your last name? And you say, wow, that's a great question. Obviously, in my mind, there's zero value there. You're just using words that you think are important to try to do something. So I've always enjoyed the briefing where it was a give and a take, push and back. Here's what I think, or you present your value proposition. Let me take a couple of shots at it. Let me bang it around a little bit. You respond back and forth. It's tricky. I think people have to be comfortable in what they're saying and what they're doing, but not be too overly in love with it. And I think maybe that's where I think we're both saying the same thing. You got to throw something out and let it go.
Yeah, I think part of it, going back to this difference between market intelligence and competitive intelligence, and in the later part of your career, you were much more involved in market intelligence as well than your competitive intelligence, is that there's a certain fear that's underlying all of that says, where are they going to put me when someone asks about hot vendors? Are they going to put me high on the list? Are they going to put me low on the list? We're very clear with them right from the jump that every conversation is by its nature NDA, because we don't do any competitive intelligence. And so we're not going to tell Oracle what you do, and we're not going to accept in the most general terms. We're not going to reveal any state secrets, and anything you tell us is not going to show up in briefing notes, and often, so for some of them, it disappoints them. And for others, it's actually, especially for the more established ones, it's rather relaxing because they know they can, I hate this phrase, open the kimono and tell us the whole story. Just the one that I thought of.
Yeah, no, that's a classic for sure. Probably falling out of favor now, but boy, I started off hearing that all the time. What's interesting, Paula, similar to what you did at Gartner and IHL, we had NDAs with most of the big clients. And occasionally you would get people trying to dig around and maybe get more information on their competitors than they should. And I always pushed back and said, if I'm giving you stuff that's going to help you on your competitive intelligence, what do you think I'm doing? What I'm saying about you to somebody else? So if you're working with an analyst and they're giving up things they really shouldn't, I would be very careful working with that analyst going forward.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And it's something we're very conscious about all the time, is that if I'm saying this to you, you're going to wonder, what am I saying to the next guy? That's absolutely true.
And you know what they're saying. So that's always a tell. The question I get asked all the time, and I'm going to be very curious to hear your pushback or your thought on it, is how often should I brief or engage with you? And this is back in my Gartner days and certainly at my HL days. So how often should a founder, should a vendor brief you?
I guess it really depends on what's happening. If nothing much has happened in the past quarter, then just twice a year. If you're on a real exciting trajectory, once a quarter is okay. Certainly once a year. Just hook up. Even if you're not clients, if you just want to keep us apprised of your progress, once a year works really well.
Yeah, interesting. I always said, you briefed me enough that if I'm standing in the beer line at NRF on a Monday night at midnight and somebody asks me about your capability, do I have enough information to say a little more blunt about it? But I like that quarterly at a max, and then by yearly at a minimum, quarterly at a max if you have something to say. But in the Gartner mold, it was unlimited inquiries. So my advice to all my clients was, listen, build a relationship. And I'm curious, Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant just an initial hit. If you're a client, we encourage you to consume as much as you want.
So let's just say a vendor or a founder that isn't a client and probably isn't going to be, but has reached out and got connection. So that's the quarterly, that's the bi-yearly, maybe quarterly if something dramatic is going on or you're in a hot space.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I'd agree with that.
For our clients, we try to talk to them monthly, actually. That for us is ideal. We can have an hour monthly or whatever it takes. And especially if we try to do pre-NRF calls with our clients, let them go through their storyboard with us, which we think is pretty important since they're spending so much money on the thing. That's our general goal is once a month, if we can do it, and absolutely before NRF. And then we do a post-NRF debrief, or the guys do at least. And so if we've hooked up with you at NRF or we've seen something cool at NRF, we'll mention it and we'll let you know we're going to do it. But definitely we've found over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years maybe. I lost a year somewhere in there. I don't quite know why. Yes, I do. But definitely storyboarding what you're going to do at NRF is something we're really good at. And we did that with some really large vendors who spent crazy money to be at NRF.
Yeah, that's the one thing. That's probably you're going to laugh, but that's probably the one thing I miss about not being an active analyst anymore is that sort of that run up to NRF. I mean, the last couple of years, I began scheduling NRF and setting up the meetings, figuring out how many meetings. In the old days, I used to actually try to go to sessions, and in the last 5 or 6 years, I basically just turned all those days over into appointments and didn't. I don't think I went to a single session all through NRF.
Yeah, I don't think any of us have. We've tried over the years, and I think there were a couple of years Steve might have made it, but generally, especially as it's gotten bigger and bigger, you schedule half-hour meetings, and somehow you've got to go across the whole floor or across the whole auditorium in 10 minutes, and by the end of the day, you got nothing.
Yeah, I ended up. The model I adopted was scheduling an hour, but that was part of the commute time to the next meeting. So typically, they were usually about 40, 45 minutes, and boy, towards the end of my career, I knew if somebody was down in the basement and I was up on the main floor, okay, that's a 15 or 20 minute commute. And then the last year, I spent a lot of time up on the startup floor, which is a whole different commute pattern. So I ended up, I think my record was 34, 35 meetings over the 3 days. And then I extended into Wednesday for startups and all that stuff. How many meetings did you guys typically target?
Oh my God. It's basically we fill up half-hour meetings with maybe a half-hour break over the course of 3 days. So whatever, and starting at 9 and ending at 5.
Yeah.
So however many that works out to. Yeah. Honestly, I haven't gone in a couple of years. I'm going to be really candid because that's what I am and who I am. Long ago, I made a rule, and those of you who've met with me at NRF know that. I say, don't give me any demos. I won't remember a thing. Let's just talk. Because if what you got is interesting, let's schedule a demo after the fact when I can actually pay attention and focus and take notes and have it be really good. It's just there's only so much that you can do and that you can absorb over that period of time. So we go and we take pictures of things that look interesting and cool. We spend some time talking with our vendor clients and talking about how the show's going for them, things like that, but no demos. For me, anyway, some people do okay with it. I blank. It's just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I agree 100% with you. The last place I want to do a demo is at NRF, and it's
exactly.
And Paula, I didn't even take handouts. I don't want to carry the paper around. So literally, if you're handing me a gift card, I'll carry that, which I probably shouldn't say. But no, if you're handing me paper, forget it. You either send it to me or whatnot. I'm curious because I think you're hinting at something that has become a theme as I've talked to some PR folks in the last room, and then I'm talking to other folks. Relationship. I'm advocating that the goal that a founder should do is develop a relationship with analysts, with the press, as opposed to trying to do briefings. And it sounds like maybe with your idea of don't do a briefing, just talk to me, you're in that camp also. Did I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, you are. Ultimately, I want to know what problem you're solving and what you do. But it's really nice when you can actually also connect with somebody and start a relationship of any. I like people. And that's how we became friends, secret friends.
Yeah.
Is that I genuinely like people. And for the most part, I don't mind if they agree or don't agree with me. I'm just curious to get to know people, how they got to where they got to, why they think that what they're doing is good. And certainly, how they're doing at the show. I always want to know that. How you guys doing?
So when you go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I stepped on you. So when you show up at a meeting, then do they want to present? And I assume they want to present, or they probably have their canned deal. Do you say, "Hey, stop it. Let's just talk," or do you say ahead of time, "Listen, don't present to me. I want to get to know." Did you set the expectation before you got to the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, what we've started the last couple of years, we're advising not just clients, but even prospects or anybody to do a pre-brief with us before NRF, because then we can focus. They can do a demo if they want. We can get to know each other. And then it becomes the meet and greet and hi and putting a face to the name. And it's much more collegial and congenial.
Yeah, that was my philosophy always. Do a pre-brief and definitely show me the deck you're going to present to everyone else, just so I have a chance to comment on it. Do a full pre-brief when I'm sitting in my ergonomic chair, and then let's build a relationship at NRF. That's interesting. How many fellow analysts do you think that way? I have no idea.
I don't know. I'm not even sure my partners think that way, but I'm not subtle about it. I just say no demo. Not going to do me any good at all. I think Steve can still absorb them a little bit, but we don't have so much a party line. We're small enough that we can get away with. And for me, it's always been, don't show me a demo. I'm just going to sit here thinking about how much my feet hurt anyway.
There's probably one of the biggest clients that both you and I had that absolutely insisted on the booth tour. And I won't say who, because I really don't want to get flamed. But I'm pretty sure
it was about 8 or 9 years ago after I saw Angelo for the third time. Yeah, I was done with that.
Yeah, I want to show you the booth. So let's fight through literally a crowded booth to look at some silly demo, which is all made up, as opposed to build a relationship. But Paul, it took me forever to understand that. And this is something founders need to understand also, that those AR people or those marketing people, they were incented to drag an analyst around a booth. They weren't necessarily incented to build a relationship. And boy, once I figured that out, then I took control of all those situations, said, listen, I'm not fighting through your booth to go look at some silly demo. Let's talk. And
no, that's actually really a challenge for us in particular, because a lot of AR people are paid based on mentions,
exactly.
Which I only learned recently. And because we don't do that, they don't have a whole lot of skin in the game, because people do what they're paid to do. That's Paula's rule. People do what they're paid to do. So it can be challenging. But once they understand that we make our own decisions about what we're going to call out technology-wise in the post-NRF debriefs, then everybody relaxes. And over time, I find that it gets really nice. The relationships we build are really better, because we're so happy when our clients succeed. We're really happy when startups succeed. It's just really a nice feeling. We worked with one startup a few years back. I think it ended up getting bought. And we got them really, it was the earliest stage company I think we'd ever worked with. It was one of the price optimization vendors. And it was really fun. It was really fun for them. It was fun for us. It was a good engagement. I felt like they grew up some, and we became friends out of it.
Yeah, the startup community is just insane. I've had the time of my life kind of beginning to understand that and looking at it, being around the energy, being around the dreams. It's a little frustrating sometimes that I wish, maybe understand how the real world works, but I guess that's my new role. Hey, what social media do you pay attention to? How should vendors use social media?
Oh, that's a tough one. Social media has gotten so toxic in the last year or two. Generally, I get the best information from LinkedIn. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Paula. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Thanks for bringing me up as a speaker. I have a quick question for Paula. You mentioned that it's most effective, and just for sake of introduction, I consider myself an analyst relations professional. I know Jeff for, many years.
Yeah, too many years.
Too many years. Not too many. It's never too many.
Well, it's better than the alternative for sure.
Not enough. So you said it's a best practice to pre-brief you before NRF. So can you give some tips as to what people should talk to you about in that pre-briefing?
Yes. What's the problem that you're going to solve, that you think that you're solving? How do you solve it? And what are you going to be doing at NRF? And where's your booth going to be located, of course? And how do you feel about what you're doing there? What are you introducing? Honestly, Wendy, I used to advise clients not to introduce stuff at NRF because I can't tell you the number of press releases that show up in my inbox, and it's kind of overwhelming, but it doesn't seem like it's changing anything. So my best advice is to let us know beforehand what you're going to do.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And then one last thing. Do you think it's better to introduce things before NRF or after if you're going to do a press release?
Before. Way before,
Okay.
Way before. Don't forget, you got all these people who are basically right before, like in, let's say, November timeframe. They're watching to see how the sales are curving. And thankfully, from my perspective, retailers are stopping opening on Thanksgiving. So the sales curves should start normalizing some again next year. And if you're an IT person in particular, all you're doing is sitting around hoping nothing breaks because all development is on hold. So it's a good time to send out introductions because people might have time to read some of it. Once you're in the middle of December, then they're thinking about how the season is going. Do they have to do something to salvage the season? There's those kinds of questions that come up. But a little early, before December, I'll say 13th, just as an arbitrary number, you usually will get someone's attention.
So between November and December 13th.
Yeah, and I don't know what day December 13th falls on this year, but it's just a year that comes into my mind.
Okay. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
And I would,
thank you.
And I would agree 100% with what Paula said. I'd happy to give an NDA. I'm happy to embargo, whatever the case may be, but you're literally running out of things not running out of things to do, but you're ramping up for NRF and you're looking for coverage and you're looking for all that. So not to take advantage of that time to me is insane. I understand the marketing thing of, we want to make the big noise at NRF, whatever. The problem with that is, as an analyst, you can really support interesting developments or announcements, not support, but I mean, talk about trends or whatever. If it's not being released to NRF, forget it. I don't know about you, Paula, but I don't even answer texts during NRF because there's really no time to do that. My schedule's set and locked down. I have zero flexibility. So I can't interact with the press.
And the week or two before are ridiculous because you're trying to get out of the office and make your plans and finish up any last minute things, deliverables that you committed to. If you're speaking, you're finishing your speech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me to just ferret through all those bloody press releases is exhausting. It just really is.
Yeah, I don't know that folks understand that, what we just said there. But if you're an analyst presenting at NRF, not only are you literally worried about your 4 busiest days of the year and you're doing all the prep because you're meeting with all your important clients, you're also presenting. And so you've got the intensity, the nerves, all that sort of stuff, everything rolled together. And then try to focus on a press release, it's just not going to happen. Now, I was never really successful getting a whole lot of press releases released way ahead of time so I could chew through it and process it. But boy, I'll beat that drum with you every day of the week. So anybody else have any questions, feel free to pop up your hand now that I'm a moderator. I can see it, and we'll just keep on going. Paula, let's go back to social media because I actually agree with you. I started out on Twitter way back where I think there was some value in Twitter. Now, honestly, if I could burn it to the ground, I think I probably would. Even though I think retail Twitter and tech Twitter is still decent, but political Twitter is obviously just a complete dumpster fire. But LinkedIn is something I never fooled with a whole lot. Initially, I never felt like I needed to or had to or whatever reason. Gartner really wasn't big about throwing a lot, at least back in the old days, about throwing a lot of content out. But now I think, I think LinkedIn is actually pretty cool. And
I've only been in one conversation, and I've probably been involved in LinkedIn maybe 3 or 4 years, relatively deeply. And in all that time, there's only been one conversation I've gotten into that's gotten political. And you know how I feel about those things. It wasn't pleasant. And at some point, and it's still going on actually out there, it has to do with Florida and the workforce. And at some point, I actually wrote it in the body of the thread. I think we ought to delete this thread. This has just gone way off because someone's saying to me, how can you think that way? You're a managing partner. And it's just crazy. So the reason I prefer LinkedIn to the other two is there's less arguments generally. It's much more civilized. Yeah. And real information is getting passed around.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if a founder's not really utilizing LinkedIn, I think that's a huge mistake. And I would agree. I'm actually paying, let's see, I look at Twitter for breaking news, but I also have it. Even though I think I am following a couple thousand people and 6,000 are following me. It's just so much spammy nonsense. The real business value is on LinkedIn, which means a founder needs to be really paying attention to LinkedIn, probably spending some time on it, definitely developing relationships. Paula, do you accept invitations to connect from founders, or do you have to know them before you do that?
No, I'll accept invitations. What I do is when I get an invitation, I look and see what they do. And as long as it's in my sphere of business influence, I'll accept it.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with that at all because it's not like a Facebook connection where there's a level of intimacy to it. It's not like Twitter where there are no connections particularly. It's just follow and follow. I'm always happy to accept a LinkedIn connection. And even I do actually check my messages on LinkedIn and I answer them. So if you're a founder and you have a question for me, maybe I'm saying a terrible thing here that's going to cause my inbox to flood, but feel free. It's lovely for people to congratulate me on my work anniversary, but I'm more than happy to talk to anybody, really.
Paul, I made a mistake on LinkedIn. I just put something about a co-host of This Week in Innovation, and I forgot to turn off the notifications. So it's like I probably got 100 of the exact same congrats on the new gig or whatever the standard, whatever it was. I went, oh man, I didn't mean to do that. So I think that raised an interesting point. Perhaps at least, and this is the thing I'm beginning to preach a lot to the founder community, do not send a generic one-sentence invite. Say, hey, I saw you said this, thought it was interesting, would like to connect. At the minimum, at least that you're not a spam bot or you're not anything else. You've actually spent 10 seconds thinking about that. And I'm far more likely to connect. And if you say, there's a couple are out there that they're just literally just trying to collect as many connections as possible. I don't need that. And then don't spam. If you spam more than 2 or 3 times, you're done. And spam isn't, hey, this is what we're doing. That I think that's fair. But if this is what we're doing and it's a daily thing and it's clearly a spam, then we've got a problem.
The ones that I tend to look out for are the ones that are based in Florida that are either in real estate or financial management. Then I can sniff those out a mile away. But like I said, I'm always happy to connect with anybody involved with me. I don't worry about it.
I think that's great advice for any founder because I'm not sure they're taking advantage of that opportunity as much as they should. Mohammed, welcome to the stage. Do you have a question for us?
Hi, Mohammed.
Hey, Jeff, Paula. Great to hear you guys on this. It's a really important topic. Analyst relations. The second word is relations. And I was just wondering how your experience looking at startups and looking at established legacy players and how well that part of the business was maintaining those relationships with turnovers of people or being able to get, for you guys to have the trust and the visibility to say this idea you have or new business solution that you're bringing out is not really viable or it needs to be looking a little different. So a couple of different parts of that: people, turnover, and also the viability of what you're looking at, especially for startups. Thanks.
Sure.
First of all, clearly we make relationships since Jeff and I both are really happy to see you, and I haven't worked with you in a couple of years. So relationships are really important. So that's why when I saw you, frankly, people like us love turnover because that means we get to talk to another company, and that's good. A company that we might not have otherwise heard from. Or I don't have a problem with turnover particularly. There may be more of a challenge in the existing company that you've left, but in the new company, it's fine with me. Jeff, what do you think?
Oh, so the theme that's coming out in all these rooms is relationship, which is interesting because I don't know. I never really thought thought being a squishy, warm, cuddly teddy bear kind of a person. But boy, I tell you what, it's relationships. So Paul, I agree 100%. When I saw Mohammed in the last room and I see him in this room, I can think back, Mohammed, some of those fantastic conversations we had at Sapphire over the years. And you're one of those guys. And there's hundreds of executives that I've met that I'm just looking forward to engaging with and bantering back and forth what's happening in the world carefully, very carefully, not necessarily getting political or anything. We're in the economics business. So how does this policy or that policy impact? That's all relational. I think a lot of people make that mistake of trying to get into a pitch too quick and not building a relationship. If you want to be in this industry, I was born in this industry. I've been trying to get out of this industry ever since, and I've not succeeded. And Paula's been in retail for a long time. And most of the analysts that I look at and see, there's definitely a bunch that pop in, do a year as an analyst and pop back out. But the ones that are driving the thought leadership are committed to the industry. To miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity to not build a relationship because you pop to a pitch should be malpractice. It should be a crime. And you do that a lot. And probably, Mohammed, some of your clients, I bet, do that. So that's something to test and think about. Are you trying to, if you bump into an analyst in a hallway, are you trying to build a relationship or trying to do a pitch? And I guarantee you, most of your clients are going to try to do a pitch, and that's a mistake.
Yep. Agreed with you. I was also curious, though, from working with a specific client as the person in the AR department or whoever you're dealing with, changes within that organization. Does that create special challenges for you as the organization you're working with changes?
Yes. And it's actually, in some cases, in one case in particular that is probably dear to all of our hearts, yes, a lot. The long and the short of it. And you try your best to make a connection. Sometimes it works really well. I can think of a couple companies where it's worked really well. And I can think of a couple companies where it's been horrifying.
Yeah.
Not horrifying.
I think, back to the point, Jeff, you were saying, you build the relationship and then you can do the pitch, or you can have the level of trust that you need. But then you've got to work ensuring that these people are still part of your organization and don't give them a reason to leave or whatever. But obviously, people leave for many different reasons. So thanks a lot. One of the things I asked you guys, though, was how, I don't want to call it like honest you are, but how direct are you? Jeff, you're always direct. But to telling a startup, hey, you know what? You think that your stuff is different, but it really is nothing but the same. And you really need to rethink your product or your approach or your value proposition. And that's
I don't know that I'd be that.
Go
ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that was the last point, and then I'll leave the stage and let somebody else come on. Thanks.
I would never say that to somebody because I don't think it's polite. It's not about being. I would find ways to talk about I would ask about how do you differentiate and how do you plan to compete with, and let them come to their own conclusion. Nobody ever accused me of being but I am very respectful. And I would never, ever say something like that to somebody who's gone to all that work and all that trouble. I just wouldn't. It's not right.
And the other point about that too, Mohammed, is that there's 500 to 600 tier 1 retailers. There's 4,000 or 5,000 tier 2 retailers. Nobody corners all that. So if somebody has a great idea, I don't think I would ever dump on a founder, but I would push to understand if they understood the industry, the space they're in, the area that they're focusing on, and really go with that. I don't think any of us could possibly ever say that's a dumb idea, but I think we could. Hopefully, what I've said over the years is help me understand what you're thinking. To Paula's point about what problem you're trying to solve, I don't think I was ever quite clever enough to come up with that phraseology, but I would have used it for sure. And I'm looking more for, hey, we think we're so special that we've cornered the market. No, you really haven't, because there's 6 other players doing that. That's more my angle. And because if I did, there's a lot of people, and I've been doing this gig now for 22 or 23 years. There's a lot of people that have spun off a lot of companies and made a lot of money. Few of which I thought sounded silly. So I learned a long time ago, I'm going to be careful because somebody's going to buy something. So that's how I'd approach it.
Great. Thanks. I appreciate your perspective, guys.
Sure.
Hey, Chris.
Nice to see you again, Mohammed.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you have a question for us?
Hi, yes. No, I just wanted to give a very quick feedback as an analyst relations person who helps startups to understand this space and to deal with analysts and to use it.
What do you got?
We want you to be frank with us. We want you to tell us if something from your perspective isn't fully thought out, or if what we believe is unique really isn't. And I would never think that it would be not polite or anything. Of course, there are different ways of saying this, but generally it is super important for us to get this kind of feedback, because otherwise we might mistake the conversation as some sort of product market fit validation and then go off and invest too much money into something that's not really on a good track. So we absolutely want you to be frank with us. Just as a quick feedback.
Yeah, that's good. I love hearing that. I think you're talking to two people we're probably about as direct as they come. So I would agree with you on that. Just the only thing I would say, though, and as an analyst relations person and a professional, you definitely want to understand who you're working with as an analyst. The first thing I would look at is how long they've been an analyst. There are analysts that I think have spent about 6 minutes being an analyst on their way to doing something else. I would process the input they would give very carefully. However, when you're dealing with somebody that's been an analyst for 10, 15, 20 years, that they're in a different category. And that's the point I want to be very careful how I say this. I'm not looking to pick a fight with anybody, but I don't know. Just always know the source. And just because they're in a big firm, it's not like, I'll say it. So as a Gartner analyst or any analyst from a big firm, it's not like when you hire on, they immediately plug in all the knowledge that's been in that firm for the last 30 years. The only knowledge you have is what you bring in as an analyst. Now, you have resources, you pull information down, you're surrounded in info, but boy, if you've been an analyst for 6 minutes, and that's not that much of an exaggeration, I'd be very careful about taking their advice too seriously until they've learned.
Yeah. I got to agree. And I don't remember if you were on at the beginning, but both Jeff and I have been in retail quite literally our whole life. So we understand the landscape pretty well. Part of RSR shtick, the company I co-founded, is that we take that domain expertise and we supplement it with lots of surveys so that we can understand how the market has shifted, because frankly, it's now almost 20 years since I was a practitioner. I was a practitioner for 23 years. I used to go buying with my dad when I was a kid. You want to make sure that the person you're talking to, I want to reemphasize what Jeff said, knows what they're talking about, that they're not just someone who got plucked into this role for a short period of time. So someone who knows what they're talking about would tend to be more diplomatic in some ways. And no one's going to ever accuse me of being, again, shy, and I'm about as candid as they get, but I'm also polite. I try to be, and so does Jeff. He can talk about how he's bullish in this way and that way, but he's not gonna diss you for no good reason. There's ways to let you know that you can shift a little bit without telling you your product. You have an ugly baby. That's the art form of being an analyst, is to have a conversation and leave the founder feeling good about themselves, and not just say you have an ugly baby, now go away.
And the other point I would add to that, Chris, too, and this kind of goes back to my Gartner days, is in the old days, now Gartner morphed that model a little bit, but in the old days, there were what we called user analysts and vendor analysts. So I was a vendor analyst, which meant my task was to understand the vendor landscape in the retail industry. So my clients started with IBM and SAP, Oracle, all the way down to somebody in a garage. And then my colleagues on the other side were end user analysts. And a lot of those folks tended to want to be extremely aggressive with the vendors because they were the end user analysts. And so when you're dealing with one of those characters, you had to understand where that energy was coming from. I didn't agree with it. Honestly, I sat in briefings and was just shocked many times when I was with some of these folks at how literally aggressive they were. And a lot of times not even listening to what the vendor was said, because they're the end user analysts. They talk to a retailer and your solution is terrible. That's great. You understand that might be a multi-billion-dollar company, and you talk to one retailer who had bad experience, but did you look at the retailer? Did you look at the situation? Did the vendor plug themselves into a situation that was unsolvable? All those kinds of things. So like everything, you just have to be smart about who you're engaged, know their background, know how, most importantly, how long they've been an analyst and where they came from. So in our case, where we're covering retail, did the person come out of retail, or were they a journalist and needed to get a new gig, so popped over to cover retail? Those are all some of the equations. So as much as I want to say I think most analysts try to do the best job they can, I also want to be smart about it and make sure that the vendor community understands who and what they're doing, and maybe some of the dirty laundry that's behind the scenes. Just be a smart.
Yeah, thank you so much. Couldn't agree with you more. And I believe that tells a lot about the value in the R in analyst relations, because it means that the AR folks need to understand who are we briefing, who are we talking to, who are we getting insights from, and what's the context of theirs, so that we can make sense.
Yeah, and we're really big on trust. I got to say that you have to be able to trust us. If you can't trust us, what the heck? What do you want to talk to us for?
Yeah, good stuff. Chris, I'm a huge fan of the job of analyst relations. I think it's a game changer for vendors that do it correctly. And it's not a deal killer for ones that don't, but they're leaving a lot of stuff on the field. If you don't have a good analyst relations person who knows how to make sure your executives know what they're talking about, make sure they understand the relationship, how analysts work, because over the years, I've seen it all. Executives be super aggressive, be super timid, all of the above, or just literally just spat out their marketing platitudes, which is just garbage. There's no value. And I'm thinking of one very large company that's all they did was spit out marketing, except for one executive who was old enough and powerful enough that they could actually give good insight to an analyst. And so that's where the trust component comes in. Because I have to be able to trust the executive. How do I say this? I don't know, Paula, help me out here. There has to be an overt conversation and a covert conversation. And so if the executive is whatever, can't have on background say, I said this, but maybe it's a little more like this, I think that's a challenge. An executive that can do that immediately gains in the analyst's eyes. You have to be careful. Can't let that analyst burn you. If you're always just presenting the platitudes, there's really not a lot of value there.
No, it's one reason I like Mohammed. Mohammed used to be one of my clients once upon a time, and it was a good relationship. And then there are people I can see on here who I've had dinner with, I'm friends with, and we've done a little bit of work with each other or not. The key is there's got to be mutual respect, friendliness, and trust. And if there isn't, find somebody else. Good God, there's enough of us out there now.
Yeah, for sure.
You know?
Thanks, Chris. Darius, what's your question? I know it's going to be a good one.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, Paula. Jeff, another great guest and conversation. I think you read my mind, Jeff, with your last comment. I was thinking about how do you keep in touch with the customers of all the companies that are pitching them. So I think you explained how it works at like large companies. There are actually different analysts, but maybe Paula, you're not Gartner, so you probably have to do both.
You lost me a little bit. What?
Probably size.
Go ahead. Try
Sorry.
again.
Yeah, so I'm asking how do you stay connected to what's going on in the market on the customer side, actually? Do you interview retailers on a regular basis? What kind of activities do you usually have going on to hear it from the other side of
this? Last year was an anomaly because we've all been locked down. But normally that's why God made user group conferences. You get to talk to people. You get to do some networking. We run 10 to 12 benchmark studies a year, so we get an aggregate kind of view of the industry, which I think is important. It's one of the values of research-based research, is that you start to understand what a broad swath of the industry is doing, not just those who can afford to use you. So that's how we do it. And then in terms of individual companies, it's interesting. We talked about the barrage of press releases that we ignore around NRF, but the rest of the year, I'm always we'll pass around if we get a press release about somebody that we've either had a briefing with or conversations with, we'll pass it around and go, hey, look at what happened. These guys did pretty good, you know?
Darius, I think the way to describe what we do, and I think Paula approaches the exact way I did, because Paula worries about a lot of retail. I worried. My beat was everything in retail. So I just swam in a sea of information. What you also want to be careful is, or not careful, but you want to know when you're talking to an analyst, do they have a specialty? So are they merchandising? Are they supply chain? Are they BI? Whatever the case may be. And understand that there might be a bias, not a bias, but that's just their area of expertise. So if you're talking to somebody and you're pushing outside their area of expertise, you're not going to have as good a conversation or an interaction, and you have to tailor that a little differently. And Darius, it's perfectly appropriate to ask the analyst, what is your focus? What is your beat? What is your coverage area? And make sure before you start talking to them that if your solution doesn't really sit in their space, but you still want to build a relationship, that you just sort of don't get locked in on your standard pitch that would work with myself or Paula, because we care about all things retail, and make that appropriate to whatever that analyst specialty is. So one last question.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darius. One last question. Let's see. I'm not sure how to pronounce.
Hi.
There you go.
Swami. Hi, I'll be very quick. So you talk about solving a problem. How high or how low is the question, the answer to that question? In a sense, if you say, for instance, you want a person to be a bit more technical or to be a bit more business or somewhere in between in answering that question?
It's a great question. You want to go first, Paul?
No, you go ahead.
So that is a fantastic question. And Mohammed, I'm pretty sure, has heard me say this 1,000 times. Listen, I'm a business strategist. If you get into the nuts and bolts about programming, I am done. Could care less. Other analysts inside Gartner would really want to climb into the weeds about whatever the technical solution, the software component, the hardware component. Classic is, I won't say which company, but just say imagine a large company that sold routers. And if their briefing was always about speeds and feeds, I'm done. I could literally care less about that. So there were other analysts in my old firm that cared passionately about speeds and feeds. And that kind of goes to the point of understanding what the analyst coverage was. If they're a technical analyst, man, bring in the engineers. If they're business strategists, then you better make sure that the people that you're putting in front of me can talk about the business aspect of this particular router or piece of hardware, server, whatever the case may be. So that there's no right answer to that. It is 100% dependent on what the analyst coverage is.
Thank you.
Yeah, think about it at like peeling an onion, right? So you start from the business issues and then you work your way down through your solution.
It's always safe to start with a business solution for sure. But then just find out if it's again, perfectly appropriate to say, hey, do you want the strategy or do you want the technology side? Honestly, it's the nanosecond I heard speeds and feeds, I was done. And fortunately, those are back in the days before Zoom, where I literally could just update my Facebook page if somebody was rattling off about speed this or whatever that. I literally could care less. And I was clear about that. Always clear. I do not care about that. I care about the strategy piece of it. Right. I think that's probably a great place to wrap it up. Paula, as always, thank you so much. I'm very gracious with your time. The insights were off the charts. I'm really surprised to see how many places we really sank up as far as how we approached the game. So thanks for coming by.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and nice to meet you all. Any of you I don't know, hi, Venu. I didn't get a chance to say hi to Venu. And hi to anyone I've met before, and nice to meet you to anyone I haven't met before. So have a great day, eh?
Hey, and with that, we'll close the room.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode. For more info, refer to the pod notes below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us grow. I'm your host, Jeff Roster, Analyst at Large. If you want to connect, follow us on Twitter at JeffPR or at Brian Sathianathan, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Visit my website at roster.retail.com or Brian's at Iterate.ai. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.